No, when I think of babies, happy gurgles and giggles don't come to my mind. I think more whiny, annoying, loud, stinky, smelly, waste of time, life ruiner.
So, if you go to a gambling house, all right, and you're going to play dice, and on the dice are skull and crossbones on each dice, and let's say they're 20-sided dice, just for fun. And so you think the odds are pretty low, no big deal. But if you get two, snake eyes, two skull and crossbones, a gun pops out of the table and shoots your wife. You still going to gamble? No, well, see, when it's some non-thing, when it's a thing in the non-averse, and you're just going to pluck it out, you don't know it yet. You don't know its disposition, its welfare. You don't know its sensitivities. What if I found the thing that your wife fears the most and the worst possible kind of death, and I put that on the dice? You still going to play the game?
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.
Philosophy is about problem solving. Sometimes the problem we need to solve is the attitude that lurks behind an argument, not a specific factual claim, and not a flaw in the explicitly stated argument. The attitude that this YouTuber Inmendham is demonstrating for you here is an attitude that I hear from vegan gains again and again and again. And the attitude is that they, as people who would refuse to have a child ever, that they are doing something bold and brave and defiant, whereas in fact what they're doing is cowardly. And they're trying to justify and normalize their own cowardice through the assertion that everyone shares this trait with them. Everyone is just as averse to these risks, these negative consequences as they are, or anyone who doesn't share their cowardice must be insane. Inmendham seems to think that it's absolutely absurd to take this risk, to risk sudden, violent death at a rate of 1 in 20. He thinks nobody would take that gamble if they knew what they were getting themselves into. In World War I, of Canadian soldiers who served, more than 50,000 died. Very roughly, your odds of being killed be 1 in 12. In World War II, strangely, the statistics are even more vague. I couldn't find out precisely how many people served in the military. Perhaps 1 in 22. Perhaps we could round it off further and say it's about the same as his image here of rolling a 20-sided dice, that your odds would be 1 in 12. Now, this is Canada we're talking about in World War II. Your odds of dying in World War II, if you were born a citizen of Poland, are shockingly, staggeringly terrible. The fate of the Polish people as a whole, both Jewish and Gentile during World War II, will give you nightmares. So it gets much, much worse than these statistics. And some people were cowards. Some people were cowards. And some people found ways to struggle and fight that were not nearly so easy as joining a conventional army that would at least provide you with meals and a place to sleep. Some people had to fight in much more terrible circumstances. If your position is there is no risk worth taking at a rate of 1 in 20, that you wouldn't roll the 20-sided dice and risk your own life, you are a coward. And I understand that you want to justify that cowardice by generalizing that cowardice, by saying that all of humanity shares this trait with you, but you're wrong. Having a child takes guts. Having a child involves elements of risk. You have to be bold enough to endure unspeakable suffering. Not everyone should join the army. Not everyone should become a combatant. Not everyone should become a parent. Not everyone has what it takes. And I would never attempt to convince Vegan Gaines that he should become a parent. He would doubtless be a terrible parent. He is doubtless correct in his assessment that he should never have children. But isn't it fundamentally humble, humiliating to stop and reflect that this is something I can't do? This is something you personally can't do. This is something you're lacking, but that others should do, must do, that even perhaps is a little bit heroic when others do it. That's something you might be able to admire in others. No, no, no. What people like Inmendham must do is justify their own ego by vilifying more than 90% of the human race, by saying that everyone else is crazy. Everyone else is crazy because they don't share this fundamental cowardice. There's a philosophically significant contrast between this problem I've been describing and what goes on in the minds of newly converted atheists, people who've just made the transition from American Christianity to American atheism in the 21st century. Let me just pause to disclose, I am myself an atheist, and I am not one of these atheists who has the attitude of whatever makes you happy. Like, you do you. I'm not an atheist who's in favor of spiritualism or spirituality or continuing to celebrate Christmas just so that you can sing songs with your extended family. I am much more of an extreme and uncompromising atheist. But nevertheless, I'm not interested in supporting an atheist movement that's built on a lie any more than I'm interested in supporting a religion that's built on a lie. I'm quite willing and eager to examine the defects and disadvantages of atheism and the attitudes atheism brings into our lives in the same way that I'm willing to examine the defects of religion and the attitudes and assumptions religions bring into our lives. All right? And there is a huge phenomenon in the 21st century. Searching now on YouTube, I couldn't find a single video examining it or discussing it. There probably are videos, and they're probably very censored and hard to find within YouTube. Topic for another video. I couldn't find a single video just now talking about the psychological pattern of people converting from Christianity to atheism and then assuming and then imagining that the most heroic thing they can do is live a life of sensual indulgence, live a life devoted to sleeping around or seducing other men's wives or engaging in whatever sexual acts were forbidden before, where suddenly they regard it as courageous, heroic, and manly, shall we say, to do all of the things their grandparents would have forbidden them to do before, precisely because their grandparents forbid them to do it before. They're incapable of recognizing that there is a kind of heroism, there is a kind of virtue, there is a kind of self-discipline in being a good person in the absence of that religious tradition their grandparents have. In the absence of the delusions their grandparents subscribe to, nevertheless, they face the same challenge of what it means to be a good person, especially in relation to controlling one's sexual desires or whatever other miscellaneous desires before they subordinated to these ridiculous religious delusions. Right? In the same way, it seems to be very easy for people to convince themselves that there is something heroic about antinatalism, that there is something heroic about refusing to take on the responsibilities of a parent just because their religious tradition, just because their parents and grandparents conditioned them to believe that having a child, that raising a child, that making those sacrifices, that taking on those responsibilities was something they were obliged to do. Okay? In rejecting religious belief, We reject the obligation as irrational. And I would agree that you have no obligation to any God to be, shall we say, sexually a good person, to be self-disciplined in dealing with your desires and the consequences of acting on those desires for yourself and others. You have no obligation to any God. You have an obligation to yourself. You have an obligation to others. You have no obligation to any God, and you have no obligation to your parents, your grandparents, your cultural traditions that may be outside of religion, strictly defined. You have no obligation to your ancestors stretching back thousands of years or any of those values in your family. You have no obligation to anyone to have a child. And yet you should still be able to recognize the type of self-discipline, the type of self-sacrifice, and yes, even the type of heroism that is required, that is involved in making the commitment to have and raise children. When I look at people like Vegan Gaines, when I look at people like Inmendham, and when I look at people who go off the deep end after converting from Christianity to atheism and suddenly have to indulge in sex with prostitutes, use of recreational drugs, in all the things that were forbidden to them before, all right? What I see is a kind of cowardice. What I see, of course, is a reckless lack of self-discipline that they are justifying in their own minds as if it were courage, because for them it's an act of rebellion against these absent grandparents, these absent ancestors, yes, even these absent gods.
Go talk what you like, tell people that it's your name. Cause even saying that I suck means you're still spreading my name.